Back at it again with the Mobius Dickus, Chapter 52, the Albatross. So in this chapter, the plot's very simple. The Pequod passes by a seemingly skeletal, ghost-like, silent boat called the Albatross, or rather, they're passing by a cruising ground named for, the ship is named the Albatross, but they're off the Crozettes. Now, of course, the Albatross is a reference to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famous poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where a crew is cursed for its transgression against nature, which would seem to align itself in terms of worldview with the notion that the events of human action, or the consequences of human action and the events of human life, are imbued with a kind of deeper meaning or a deeper significance, right? Killing an albatross is not just killing an albatross. That is what curses the crew to become this ghost ship. However, the two passages presented in this chapter seem to take a different view and seem rather critical of the viewpoint presented in chapter 36, that the task of the man who wants to understand the world is to strike through the pasteboard mask and to find the deeper meaning that is imbued in the world. The first passage here I found very kind of touching, because it is a very quiet passage from Ahab, where usually Ahab is so much louder and so much more boisterous. It says, "Though in the course of his continual voyagings, Ahab must often before have noticed a similar sight." And the similar sight is that when the two boats get close to each other and form a kind of a wave that is meeting each other, right, and creating tension and creating a kind of swirl as opposed to a constant one-directional wave, these shoals of small harmless fish dart away and range themselves fore and aft with the stranger's flank. So these fish that were following the Pequod placidly, calmly, leave. And then it says, "Though in the course of his voyages, Ahab must have noticed this before. To any monomaniac man, exaggerated or obsessive enthusiasm for one thing," and we know what Ahab's enthusiasm is for. It's for finding that meaning, for confirming that there's more to life than emptiness. "The various trifles capriciously carry meanings." So, to me, that's a pretty interesting effect of this quest of finding meaning in the events of his life, that makes Ahab see meaning everywhere. And obviously, I think this is critiqued or made ironic by seeing intentionality and meaning even in the movement of tiny little fish groups. Because Ahab turns to them and says, "Swim away from me, do ye?" murmured Ahab, gazing over into the water. There seemed but little in the words, but the tone conveyed more of deep, helpless sadness than the insane old man had ever before evinced. So I think that this passage is pretty important because it gives us a sense of sympathy for Ahab, that while it's very easy, and we have discussed previously, I guess I mixed my verbiage there. We have previously interpreted, and it is very easy to interpret, Ahab's obsession with this question of finding out whether there is a force in the world greater than humanity as pride. I think it would be a mistake not to acknowledge the kind of sadness or kind of emotional devastation of someone who is skeptical that those things exist might feel. Or the emotional devastation that someone who is sure that those meanings and intentionalities of the world exist and are contrary to the aims of the very person who is observing them. So think, if you're Ahab, I guess one would be emotionally devastated if you thought that Moby Dick was just a whale and you had bad luck, but it would be even more devastating to think that Moby Dick was representative of nature or God, or, take your pick of intentionality imbuing forces, and that those intentionality imbuing forces decided to make that whale chop your leg off, right? So swim away from me, do you? Yes, the fish swim away, but I think multiple things swim away from Ahab. The first is certainty, right? His is a quest of knowledge. And then swim away from him also, even if he's correct about the pasteboard mask, God seems to swim away from Ahab as opposed to towards him. He is chasing God as opposed to embracing God in the manner of Job, or even, Jonah is captured by the whale, but Ahab has to chase the whale. Secondarily, I want to talk about Ishmael's reaction to Ahab's proclamation. He doubles down, as Ahab always does. After this moment of sadness, he says, I'm going to chase Moby Dick around the world. And then Ishmael reacts to that statement. He says, were this world an endless plain, and by sailing eastward we could forever reach new distances and discover sights more sweet and strange than any Cyclades, a group of islands in the Greek Sea, or islands of King Solomon, then there were promise in the voyage. But in pursuit of those far mysteries we dream of, or in the tormented chase of that demon phantom that sometime or other swims before all human hearts, while chasing such over this round globe, they either lead us on in barren mazes, or midway leave us whelmed. And yes, like overwhelmed, whelmed means like drowning. So this is another rather critical passage, I think, with regard to the search for meaning behind the emptiness, or the possible emptiness of the world. It seems to imply that it's an interesting quest, but that I think the word choice of barren mazes and being whelmed is pretty strong in its critique of what the consequences of this pursuit might be, that maybe searching for these mysteries, having a tormented chase of this phantom, is the final step too far. I think the passage acknowledges that asking these questions is a natural human thing to do, right? This phantom swims before all human hearts, but it's the chasing of it. It's the obsession with finding an answer to those perhaps unknowable questions, of delving into the realm of the privileged and the inaccessible, which will lead to those negative outcomes. So this is a pretty, I think, pretty critical chapter, a pretty foreboding chapter in terms of what are the consequences of Ahab's obsession with not only his opinion on the question of the world's emptiness or non-emptiness, but also his willingness to pursue finding an answer no matter the cost. All right, see you in chapter 53.